In spring of youth it was my lot to haunt of the wide earth a spot, the which I could not love the less, so lovely was the loneliness of a wild lake with black rock bound, and the tall pines that towered round. But when the night had thrown her pall upon that spot, as upon us all, and the mystic wind went by, murmuring in melody, then, then I would awake to the terror of the lone lake. Yet that terror was not fright, but a tremulous delight, a feeling not the jeweled mine could teach or bribe me to define, nor love, although the love were thine. Death was in that poisonous wave, and in its gulf a fitting grave for him who thence could solace bring to his lone imagining, whose solitary soul could make an Eden of that dim lake. Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Lake, which was published in 1827, has an alluring yet ominous similarity to today's topic, a topic that involves just as much beauty as it does mystery. In fact, the bizarre events that take place in and around this location rival some of the most supernaturally charged areas on Earth, so much so that over the years, the locals have begun calling it the Lake Michigan Triangle.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7-8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. Before we start the show, I want to say thank you to our amazing patrons, Robin, Cassandra, Julie, Courtney, Tiffany, Tom, Stephen, and Mystica. We appreciate your continued support and generosity. If you've ever been to the Great Lakes region of the United States, you're one of the many people that understand just how vast and beautiful this part of the country really is. It's no mystery as to why millions of folks choose to visit the Great Lakes during their summer vacation, and why millions more are proud to call this region their home. From boating and kayaking to hiking, camping, and hunting, the Great Lakes and the surrounding area offer some of the best outdoor recreation that the United States has to offer. Am I biased? You bet I am. Being born and raised in the Wolverine State, I am lucky enough to have experienced what the Great Lakes has to offer firsthand. I've spent many days in and around the shores of Lake Michigan, and I have to say that it is truly one of my favorite places on Earth. With that being said, there is something about the Great Lakes, and Lake Michigan in particular, that almost seems to call to you, inviting you to explore its deceiving beauty. With a maximum depth of 923 feet and a length of 307 miles, Lake Michigan is the second largest of the Great Lakes when measured by volume, rivaled only by Lake Superior. It's also the only Great Lake that's located entirely within the borders of the United States. Its surface covers 22,300 square miles, and its 1,400-mile-long shoreline touches Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Its proportions alone are enough to impress just about anyone. But Lake Michigan, as well as the surrounding area, has a darker side that is equally as impressive as it is unexplained. Lake Michigan has always been known for its unpredictable weather and mysterious shipwrecks, but it wasn't until 1891 that people in and around the region really began taking notice of the bizarre occurrences that were taking place on the Great Lake. Although strange things were being witnessed throughout Lake Michigan, the locals began to notice that it seemed as though a majority of the incidents were taking place within a specific area on the lake. Over the years, the theory that the lake had a hot spot where more activity occurred continued to grow, and today it's now known as the Lake Michigan Triangle. Stretching east from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to Ludington, Michigan, and then south to Benton Harbor, Michigan. This vast expanse of water is responsible for some of the most inexplicable phenomena throughout the country. But in order to fully understand the unsettling history of this ancient lake, we need to start back at the beginning, where most people believe that the legend of the Lake Michigan Triangle began. On May 21, 1891, a schooner named the Thomas Hume had just unloaded its cargo of lumber in Chicago and was returning home along with its crew of 7. Although it was the month of May, both the Hume and its accompanying ship, the Ruth Simmons, encountered a severe storm on Lake Michigan. The captain of the Ruth Simmons decided that the storm was too dangerous to travel through and turned his ship back toward Chicago. But as the Ruth Simmons headed back toward the Windy City, the crew of the Thomas Hume made the decision to continue on through the storm toward Muskegon. The Thomas Hume was never seen again. When the Thomas Hume failed to reach the port in Muskegon, owners Charles Hackley and Thomas Hume dispatched Captain Seth Lee to search for the missing ship. Captain Seth Lee was unable to find any wreckage, and not one of the 7 crew members, which were presumed dead. The Hackley and Hume Company was forced to write off the disappearance as a $6,000 loss, since the ship was uninsured. The company found it hard to believe that the schooner could simply disappear without a trace. If indeed a spring storm had sunk it, then where were the fragments of the ship that would normally wash ashore after such a catastrophe? There was speculation that the Hume's crew had stolen the ship and repainted and renamed it. There were also theories that a freighter had struck and sunk it, therefore covering up any evidence of the collision. A $300 reward was offered by Hackley and Hume in return for information as to the whereabouts of the Thomas Hume. However, the reward was never claimed. For over a century, the disappearance of the Thomas Hume remained one of the legendary mysteries of the Great Lakes. Not until 2006 was some light shed on the mystery of the Thomas Hume. That year, Taras Lysenko of A&T Recovery was searching for old Navy planes in Lake Michigan's southern end. Working on behalf of the National Museum of Naval Aviation, this Chicago-based company has recovered over 30 World War II planes from Lake Michigan. Instead of an aircraft, Lysenko's sonar picked up the form of a large schooner-shaped vessel. When a team of divers went down to investigate, they were amazed to discover that this was indeed the Thomas Hume, and it was almost perfectly intact. To this day, theories as to why the Thomas Hume sank range from unforeseen inclement weather to more extreme supernatural phenomena. Ironically, tragedy would also befall the Thomas Hume's sister ship, the Ruth Simmons, just 21 years later on a voyage from Michigan back to Chicago. On Friday, November 22, 1912, the Ruth Simmons, heavily laden with 3,000 to 5,000 Christmas trees, filling its cargo hold and covering its deck, left the dock at Thompson, Michigan. Some eyewitnesses to the Ruth Simmons' departure claimed that the ship looked like a floating forest. The Ruth Simmons' departure, however, couldn't have come at a worse time, as it was the beginning of a tremendous winter storm on the lake that sent several other ships to the bottom, including the South Shore, 3 Sisters, and 2 Brothers. What happened after the Ruth Simmons departed the tiny harbor at Thompson, with its heavy load of trees, is unknown, but life-saving station logs testify that at 2:50 p.m. on Saturday, November 23, 1912, a surfman at the station in Kewanee, Wisconsin, alerted the station keeper, Captain Nelson Crate, that a schooner was sighted heading south, flying its flag at half-mast, a universal sign of distress. In his remarks on the incident, Crate wrote, "I immediately took the glasses and made out that there was a distress signal. The schooner was between 5 and 6 miles east-southeast and blowing a gale from the northwest. Crate attempted to locate a gas tugboat to assist the schooner, but the vessel had left earlier in the day. After a few minutes, the life-saving crew at Kewanee lost sight of the ship. At 3:10 p.m., Crate telephoned station keeper Captain George E. Sogg at 2 Rivers, the next station further south. Crate informed Sogg that a schooner was headed south, flying its flag at half-mast. Sogg immediately ordered the 2 Rivers surfmen to launch the station's powerboat. The boat reached the schooner's approximate position shortly thereafter, but darkness, heavy snow, and mist obscured any trace of the Ruth Simmons and its crew. The schooner had vanished. Over the next weeks and months, remnants of Christmas trees washed ashore along Wisconsin's coastline. Astonishingly, the lake continued to give up clues long after the vessel's loss. In 1924, some fishermen in Wisconsin hauled in their nets and discovered a wallet wrapped in waterproof oilskin. Inside were the contents that identified its owner as Herman Schooneman, the captain of the Roos Simmons. Almost a century later, divers found the cargo hold of the Roos Simmons, still packed with Christmas trees, some with needles still intact. Although the mysterious sinking of these two ships may not be completely unexplained, for some, the truth behind what happened to the Thomas Hume and the Roos Simmons remains a mystery that may never truly be explained. In fact, it would seem that the tragic journeys that these two ships faced were just the beginning of a bizarre string of occurrences, one of which being the unexplained disappearance of Captain George R. Donner on April 28, 1937. The McFarland had picked up 9,800 tons of coal in Erie, Pennsylvania, and then headed west through the lakes bound for Port Washington. Because it was early in the season, the lakes and the locks in the upper part of the Great Lakes were still choked with ice, which slowed the McFarland's progress. Captain Donner had remained on the bridge for many hours, guiding his ship through the treacherous ice floes. When the ship had finally made its way into Lake Michigan, the exhausted Captain Donner retired to his cabin, with the instructions that he be called when the ship neared Port Washington. Some 3 hours later, as the McFarland neared her destination, the second mate went to the captain's cabin to awaken him as instructed, but the captain was not there. Thinking that Donner had gone to the galley for a late-night snack, the second mate checked the galley and learned that the captain had not been there either. The mate and other sailors began an extensive search of the vessel, but to no avail. Captain Donner had disappeared. No clues as to what happened to Donner have ever been found. Ironically, the day that Captain Donner disappeared was his 58th birthday. Captain Donner's disappearance is as much a mystery today as it was in 1937. Believers in the Lake Michigan Triangle point out that the O.M. McFarland was indeed in the triangle when Captain Donner vanished. The other unsettling thing about Donner's disappearance is that when the crew came to wake him, not only was Donner not in his room, but his door was locked from the inside. Besides the case of Captain Donner, one of the strangest missing person cases ever recorded in the U.S. is that of Stephen Kubacki. Stephen Kubacki was a student at Hope College, a small private Christian university near the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan, when he vanished in February 1978. Stephen had gone off for a solo cross-country skiing trip, and he had only planned on being gone for a day or maybe two, but he didn't return. He left a 200-yard trail of footprints in the snow leading past the edge of Lake Michigan. The one-way path ended abruptly, leading investigators to conclude that Kubacki had drowned somewhere under a thick layer of unbroken ice. Responding officers said that they found his belongings left in a neat and orderly manner. The skis were side by side, facing the lake, about 8 inches apart. The ski poles were stuck in the snow upright and on the outside of the skis. The backpack was sitting on top of the skis, fully packed. According to local news reports from February 21, 1978, snowmobilers in Saugatuck spotted cross-country skis abandoned with a backpack and contacted authorities, who immediately launched an air and land search. The investigators knew right away who they were looking for. Kubacki was known to be an enthusiastic outdoorsman who had previously climbed mountains while studying abroad in Europe. He'd been cross-country skiing in the same area bordering Lake Michigan many times before, and the trip that weekend wasn't out of the ordinary. Apparently, even the detectives who investigated his disappearance had doubts about the drowning theory. They sent his dental records to Chicago to see if Kubacki might be among the victims of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. His family had even hired a private investigator in efforts to locate him, but except for his skis, poles, and backpack, no one could find any trace of Stephen Kubacki. It wasn't until almost 15 months later that the search would finally come to an end. On Saturday, May 5, 1979, well over a year after he went missing, Kubacki woke up in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, 700 miles due east from where he had vanished. Kubacki had no memory of the previous 14.5 months, and said he didn't immediately realize how much time had passed until he bought a newspaper and saw the date. He found his way to his aunt's house in Great Barrington, about 20 miles from Pittsfield. From there, he was reunited with the rest of his family in South Deerfield. After he reemerged, Kubacki told reporters that he had found himself wearing clothes that he didn't recognize as his own, and he had a backpack filled with maps and hitchhiking signs, suggesting that he had traveled to Sacramento, San Francisco, Reno, Chicago, and Utah. He also had $40 in cash, new glasses, sneakers, and a t-shirt from a marathon in Wisconsin. "I feel like I've done a lot of running," he said in an interview the week he reappeared. His memory right up until his disappearance remained intact. He said the last thing he remembered was feeling cold and scared of being lost in the frozen darkness. Kubacki told a reporter that he believed his blackout was caused by exhaustion and exposure, and said he would see a medical doctor for a physical, but he would not be seeing a psychiatrist. Kubacki insisted that he was in a healthy frame of mind when he set off for the skiing trip. Kubacki then said, "My father was going to sign over his house to me. I had 3 courses at school and no trouble. I left a romance in Germany. There was no trouble with girls. I had a job lined up with the Holland Sentinel newspaper." Today, Kubacki is alive and well in the Pacific Northwest, working as a psychologist. For decades, he has refused to speak about his disappearance with reporters, and his ex-wife refuses to speak about it as well. His parents, who reportedly spent thousands of dollars on a private investigator after he went missing, refusing to believe that their son had died, have since passed away. Kubacki told reporters in 1979 that he was going to try and retrace his steps to piece together where he had been while he was gone. Unfortunately, I was unable to verify whether or not he ever did. Our next story is proof that strange events surrounding Lake Michigan aren't confined entirely to the water and nearby land. It would seem as though the skies above the Great Lake hold mysteries as well. On the evening of June 23, 1950, a DC-4 with certification number 10270 and tail number N95425, owned by Northwest Airlines and designated Flight 2501, was expecting 55 passengers. The fully loaded craft weighed in at 71,342 pounds, just 58 pounds below the maximum permissible takeoff weight. Captain Lind had flown for Northwest Airlines since 1941. He was checked out on DC-4 type aircraft and qualified on the Milwaukee to New York segment 5 years earlier. He maintained his qualification in DC-4s, logging almost 200 hours on that aircraft, and had flown over the route continuously. In the 90 days prior to the flight, he had flown 105 hours in DC-4 aircraft and made 15 round trips on the Minneapolis to New York and Minneapolis to Washington routes. Captain Lind also had over 900 hours logged, flying solely on instruments. Just 4 months before this flight, he completed a Civil Aeronautics Administration physical, and he had a total rest period of 24 hours since his last flight. If anyone was prepared for this flight, it was Captain Robert Lind. Co-pilot Vern F. Wolf had been with Northwest Airlines almost as long as Captain Lind. He was a capable pilot in his own right. The crew checked in with Northwest Flight Control Operations Center at LaGuardia Airport to prepare for their flight. The weather all along the route was carefully checked, and a flight plan was arranged to avoid unfavorable conditions and bring the plane in on time. While Lind and Wolf were taking care of flight preparations, and Bonnie Ann Feldman was preparing the cabin, baggage handlers loaded the plane with the passengers' luggage. The flight crew then ran through their pre-flight checklist while the passengers boarded. The engines were geared up one at a time, and the plane made its way from the tarmac to the runway. The flight plan called for a cruising altitude of 6,000 feet to Minneapolis. Aware of a storm brewing in the Midwest, Captain Lind requested a cruising altitude of 4,000 feet. He was denied due to other assigned traffic at that level. By the time Flight 2501 reached Cleveland, Ohio at 10:49 p.m. Eastern Time, Captain Lind's request to drop to 4,000 feet was approved by Air Route Traffic Control. 40 minutes later, the pilot was instructed to drop to 3,500 feet to avoid an eastbound flight at 5,000 feet, which was experiencing severe turbulence over the lake. They were expected to pass each other near Battle Creek, Michigan, and the standard separation of 1,000 feet would not be sufficient due to turbulence. By 11:51 p.m. Eastern Time, Flight 2501 had entered the vicinity of the growing storm. Captain Lind reported that he was over Battle Creek at 3,500 feet and would reach Milwaukee by 11:37 p.m. Central Time. As he neared the lakeshore, he made his last transmission, requesting a further drop in altitude to 2,500 feet. He never stated a specific reason. The request was denied. On the other side of the lake, just before midnight Central Time, Northwest Radio at Milwaukee advised New York, Minneapolis, and Chicago that Flight 2501 was overdue reporting in at Milwaukee. At that point, all Civil Aeronautics Administration radio stations attempted to contact the overdue flight on all frequencies, but to no avail. Northwest Air Traffic Control alerted air-sea rescue facilities to stand by. Flight 2501 was missing. By dawn's light, it became clear that the DC-4 had crashed. At 5:30 a.m. Saturday, June 24th, the plane officially was presumed lost, as the fuel supply would have been exhausted by that time. At daybreak, the search and rescue teams began an intense search of the fog-covered lake. The U.S. Navy, U.S. Coast Guard, and state police from Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Indiana were all involved in the search. 13 hours later, at 6:30 Saturday evening, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Woodbine found an oil slick, aircraft debris, and an airline logbook floating in Lake Michigan, many miles from shore. At 5:30 a.m. on Sunday, June 25th, sonar work by the U.S. naval vessel Daniel Joy near the oil slick revealed several strong sonar targets. The Coast Guard vessels Woodbine, Mackinac, Hollyhock, and Frederick Lee focused on the recovery of floating debris, which included a fuel tank float, seat cushions, clothing, blankets, luggage, cabin lining, and tragically, body parts. At the time, authorities wanted to determine whether the plane suffered a mid-air explosion, or whether it struck the water while still intact. These small pieces would be the only clues that they had. Small bits of debris floated endlessly over the surface of the fog-bound lake. The airplane, along with 58 men, women, and children, had disappeared, leaving few clues as to what had occurred 3,500 feet in the air. The loss of Northwest Airlines Flight 2501 represented the worst commercial aviation disaster at that time. Theories regarding what truly happened persist to this very day, and many attribute its disappearance to the Lake Michigan Triangle. The night that Flight 2501 vanished, about 2 hours after the last communication, 2 police officers reported seeing an odd, blinking red light hovering in the sky over Lake Michigan, close to where Flight 2501 went missing. Some speculate that this may have been caused by a UFO, while others attribute it to typical forms of aircraft or natural phenomena. This next mystery of the lake takes us below the surface to an underwater formation that has been labeled by some as the Lake Michigan Stonehenge. In 2007, Mark Hawley, a professor of underwater archaeology at Northwestern Michigan College, discovered a series of stones, some of them arranged in a circle, and one of which seemed to show carvings of a mastodon, 40 feet beneath the surface of Lake Michigan. According to geographical history, the submerged site would have been tundra when humans of the hunter-gatherer era roamed it 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. This lends credibility to a theory that the stones may have been placed there by the native people. Since their discovery in 2007, many people have theorized that this bizarre formation of stones may be connected to the strange occurrences and energy that is thought to reside within the lake. Regarding some of these rumors, Mark Hawley had this to say: "Much of the information out there regarding these stones is incorrect. For example, there is not a henge associated with the site, and the individual stones are relatively small when compared to what most people think of as European standing stones. It should be clearly understood that this is not a megalith site like Stonehenge. This label has been placed on the site by individuals in the press who may have been attempting to generate sensation about the story and have not visited the site. The site in Grand Traverse Bay is best described as a long line of stones, which is over a mile in length. As it is clear that Holly is trying to remain factual about his discovery, the question remains: if these stones were placed here in a specific pattern thousands of years ago, what purpose did they serve? And do they still serve a purpose today? Although multiple dives have been made in order to examine the stones, we still know very little about them. Perhaps in time, we'll discover why they are there, and if they have any connection to other Lake Michigan mysteries. Probably one of the most well-known phenomena to occur in and around the Lake Michigan Triangle involved close to 300 people. These witnesses observed something that is still completely unexplained to this very day. On March 8, 1994, 911 operators in Ottawa County began receiving calls at around 9:30 p.m. about something that looked like a string of Christmas lights way up in the sky. It wasn't just a few people reporting these things. It was counties all up and down Lake Michigan. Some sources said 300 witnesses, including several police officers, saw the lights. The reports came in from all walks of life, from police and a meteorologist to residents of Michigan's many beach resorts. Hundreds of people witnessed what they insisted were UFOs. There were so many reports that one of the 911 operators decided to call the National Weather Service radar operator in Muskegon, Michigan. The conversations that 911 had with the National Weather Service operator were taped and later made their way into the media. The radar operator's voice could be heard describing abrupt movements of the object and multiple objects appearing on the radar screen. Leo Grenier of the National Weather Service office in Muskegon said, "My guy looked at the radar and observed 3 echoes as the officer was describing the movement. The movement of the objects was rather erratic. The echoes were there for about 15 minutes, drifting slowly south by southwest, kind of headed toward the Chicago side of the south end of Lake Michigan. He said he had 3 things on his radar, and they were in a triangle shape. He said that one would move out of the triangle pattern and then move back in. He said that what he was seeing could not be precipitation, especially at that height. One object was tracked moving 20 miles in 10 seconds. The radar operator also reported this. There were 3 and sometimes 4 blips, and they weren't planes. Planes show as pinpoints on the scope. These were the size of half a thumbnail. They were from 5 to 12,000 feet at times, moving all over the place. 3 were moving toward Chicago. I never saw anything like it before, not even when I was doing severe weather." The National Weather Service later tried to downplay the radar trackings and said, "There is no relation between the UFOs and the radar tracks," said Dean Galizian, the Weather Service's area manager for Michigan. Galizian said that although the radar did show some echoes, one key thing is that the eyewitnesses saw these things at treetop level, while the radar echoes were from an altitude of 10,000 feet or higher. The following audio is the actual recording from the 911 dispatch in 1994, which I have edited for time and audio quality. Take a listen.
Well, the service is Muskegon. Hi, Muskegon. This is Ottawa County 911 calling. Yeah, how you doing? Good. You guys have access to a radar there, don't you? Yes, we do. You do. You get anything weird down in the southern Ottawa County area? Anything weird? Hold on for a second, okay? So I was just kind of curious if you noticed anything or anything on there at all. I'm looking at it in the vertical now, and it's pretty strong material. But yeah, I've never seen. Now I'm getting multiple insurance. One of the people that called that I just happened to talk to said it looked like a bunch of cylindrical objects. Well, oh my God, what is that? They were going together and coming apart. Yeah, there's 3, and they're lengthwise. Now I'm getting 3 of them, and we're getting a 3rd one now, and they're separated by about looks like about 5,000 feet in height, and about maybe curious is maybe we're separated by about 50 kilometers. Yeah, and they're very strong returns. I'm getting a real they're spiky, so there's something pretty solid. It's not a precipitation or anything, especially up at that height. Yeah. After in Hollow City, just sent me a message. He said, can you identify any intruders? It looks like 3 to 4 of them. I'm seeing three, and they're separated by, they look like a triangle on my scope. I'm looking one around down by, let's see. I'm seeing one down near South Haven. I'm seeing another one over Lake Michigan, about northwest of Benton Harbor, and another one over, west of, or east of Benton Harbor, which would be near, looks like Decatur. So I'm seeing 3 of those. They're very strong. I'm seeing another one down in Berrien County. These are huge returns. I've never seen anything like this. Not even when I'm doing storms. These aren't storms. They're just popping up all over the place. This is strange. Actually, Joshua says this green and red light does not look like an airplane. They come together and then they separate and they just keep doing this all the time. And you're seeing that? Yeah, I'm seeing 3 returns. They've moved positions now. South Haven, South Haven. Okay, I went over by South Haven, just zoomed over to the northwest by about, now they changed positions again. One about 20 miles west of South Haven. Another one just above, just like the Coloma, and the other one is just off the coast of Benton Harbor. Weird. Okay, now that one near South Haven is moved. It's moving further out into Lake Michigan. I'm getting them up. Okay, it's hot. Now I'm getting 4. No? Again, I got 4 for a while. Now I'm getting another one way down. I did for a little while. These are all up around about between 7,000 and 12,000 feet. This is strange. Well, weird. Yeah, I don't know if it's some kind of energy or the radar is picking up something. I wish we had a picture of this, but I know exactly where he sees someone. Yeah. Yeah, and so you guys out in the outer unit or little red. This is really weird. Yeah, I was getting 4. Okay, now they've moved position again. I'm sweeping it back and forth. It's kind of like a triangle. So it's back and forth from where the beam is spotted towards Chicago, then I sweep it back toward maybe Fort Wayne. Mm-hmm. And each sweep, they'll be in the same position, and then all of a sudden they'll pop up somewhere else. So it's instantaneously moving. I'm getting about between 3 and 4 returns. And they look like, sweeping in the vertical, they look like very strong sights. These are bigger than the plane. Usually the plane will pick up as a little pinpoint, but these are about, on my radar scope, these are about the size of maybe, looks like a half centimeter across. I'm going to try Grand Rapids one here too and see if they've got anything to do where it wants to. And they look like they're all moving to the south towards Chicago. There's 3 returns moving towards Chicago. They're about over center of Lake Michigan, 3 of them in a triangle, and they're about the real southern part of Lake Michigan, just off the coast of Berrien County. Okay. Just north All right, I will give them a shot and see what I can locate from that. Okay, thank you very much. You're welcome. All right, appreciate that. Yeah, no problem. Bye-bye. Yeah, this is the National Weather Service in Muskegon. I was calling to make sure that the person that called me was really a sheriff from out of the county and not a home. He was one of our dispatchers. Oh, okay. He was calling about the, we've been chasing all over down that way. Pardon? We've been chasing lights all over down that way. So what really is going on? No, I still got a car out in the area. What, can you hold on for a second? Sure. Hello? Hi. Yeah, okay. So what do these things look like? What do they look like? I don't know. We got a report of something going through the air with lights horizontally, 3 to 4 lights, going at a high rate of speed, up and down and all over the sky. Now that we've had 5 or 6 calls, right, and they've all been in the South Holland area. South Holland? Yep, from South Holland down to Overijssel, down in that area. Overijssel, all right. And we'll cover the lights. I didn't really get what color they were. Okay, yeah. Well, I did pick up about 3 to 4 blips, and they were big. They weren't flames because flames usually show up like a little pinpoint that moves through on the scope. But these were bigger. These were about the size of half a thumbnail on the scope, and they were up about between 5,000 and 12,000 feet, and they had real strong returns with them. And there were 3 of them. They bounced all over the place, but the general movement of all 3 of them were towards Chicago. I pretty much gave up looking at them when it reached to southern Lake Michigan, right towards Chicago. So I did see something, and I've never seen anything like that before. I don't know, if it's some kind of an atmospheric phenomenon. I hear they have, the Northern Lights is going on. I got a call from Manson saying that the Northern Lights are really dancing around, really bright. Oh, really? Yeah. So. Okay. It seems to me like the last one I said it was moving like to the southeast from Holland towards Allegan County. To the southeast. Oh, to the west, I'm sorry. Southwest, towards Chicago. Okay, that's talking about towards Chicago? Yeah, that's what I was seeing them actually move towards Chicago. Great. I wish we had a recording of what I could see. Yeah. Well, actually, there's some blips showing up on the computer part, and this is even recorded, so there is going to be a recording of it, so if they can, you might be able to see a movement on this if we can play this back. Okay. All right, well, if we get any more, we'll let you know also. Okay, well, yeah, please do. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
One of the eyewitnesses, Cindy Pravda, age 63, of Grand Haven, remembers that night in vivid detail. She saw 4 lights in the sky that looked like full moons over the line of trees behind her horse pasture. "I got UFOs in the backyard," she told a friend on the phone. Pravda still believes that the lights were UFOs. She said, "I watched them for half an hour. Where I'm facing them, the one on the far left moved off. It moved to the highway and then came back in the same position. The one to the right was gone in a blink of the eye, and then, eventually, everything disappeared quickly." She still lives in the same house, and continues to talk about that night. "I'm known as the UFO lady of Grand Haven," Pravda said with a laugh. Daryl and Holly Graves and their son Joey told reports in 1994 that they witnessed lights in the sky over Holland, Michigan, at about 9:30 p.m. on March 8th. "I saw 6 lights out the window above the barn across the street," Joey Graves told the Free Press in 1994. "I got up and went to the sofa and looked up at the sky. They were red and white and moving." Others gave similar accounts, including Holland police officer Jeff Velthouse. Scott Reuter of Grand Haven saw the lights in Grand Haven Township at 10:30 p.m. on March 7th. He said, "It looked like about 5 airplanes following each other fairly closely. One would blink, then the other, and another, right to left." Randy Murphy and her husband of Ada Township observed a huge shape for about 2 minutes as it flew slowly about 100 feet over the woods outside their home. It had 4 lights, she said, and made a soft whirring noise. It sounded like a single jet engine. The Michigan flap continued for several days, presumably ending on the 10th. The sightings were never adequately explained. In the aftermath, researchers were able to say that whatever it wasn't a small plane, gas, a blimp, weather balloon, satellite, shooting stars, military craft, or debris. In the end, researchers are still looking for definitive answers regarding a majority of these mysteries. The stories in today's episode are just a glimpse of the eerie phenomena that take place in the Great Lakes region. From sailing ghost ships and haunted lighthouses, to strange creatures dwelling within the nearby forests, the Great Lakes offer a world of unexplained occurrences for anyone brave enough to go looking in search of answers. Do you believe that you or someone that you know has experienced something unexplainable? If you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, you can contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. You may also visit paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. Please remember that no matter how insignificant or outlandish you believe your experience may seem, I'd like to hear about it. All of our contact information, as well as the sources that we referenced for today's episode, can be found in the show notes. You can also get involved with the podcast by joining our forum and by following us on social media. If you're wondering how you can support the podcast, you're supporting it right now just by listening, and we appreciate it. You can also help by subscribing to the podcast and sharing it with your friends. If you're looking for additional ways to show your support, you can visit patreon.com/paranormal mysteries and become a patron. Benefits include ad-free episodes and early access to select shows. New episodes of the Paranormal Mysteries podcast are produced every week and are available on all of your favorite podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries podcast, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.